When we walked in here this morning, they were chanting that the whole world is watching.
If we leave here without saying anything about why we came in the first place, it'll be heartbreaking.
Last summer, why did you come to the convention?
To end the war.
We're giving them exactly what they want, a stage and an audience.
Yeah, you really think there's going to be a big audience?
This is what revolution looks like, real revolution. We may have to hurt somebody's feelings.
Is this prosecution politically motivated?
I'm tired of hearing you. It would be impossible for me to care any less what you are tired of.
There will be order!
We have to find some courage now.
How much is it worth to you? What's your price?
To call off the revolution? My life.
Open your eyes, 'cause a new day is dawning. The new day is dawning.
Hello, I'm Ann Hornaday, Chief Film Critic for the Washington Post. Welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm very pleased to welcome Academy Award nominated screenwriter and actor Sacha Baron Cohen. Welcome, Sacha.
Hello, thank you for having me on. What does hashtag positive mean?
Well, you know, it's better than hashtag negative.
Okay, I'm in. I feel very positive.
Oh, it's Post Live. I'm sorry, it's hashtag Post Live, Washington Post Live.
Okay, there we go. I need new glasses. That's what's clear. Academy Award nominee, but unable to read the small print.
Well, between us, we'll get it right eventually. Congratulations, sir. You're nominated for 2 awards, one for Best Adapted Screenplay for Borat's subsequent movie film, the other for your supporting performance in Trial of Chicago 7 as Abby Hoffman. It's amazing. And both of these movies are sort of uncannily, they rhyme, right? They both deal with issues of free speech, political activism. Was that by design or a happy accident?
In some ways, am I echoing there? In some ways, it was an accident in that I had first joined the cast of Chicago 7 13 years ago when Spielberg was directing. But the movie had gone away, and then I had heard that it was happening again. And I was shooting Borat, and I basically decided that I had to stop Borat and play Abby Hoffman, because this was a character that I'd been obsessed with since the age of 20 when I first came across him while writing my thesis at university. It was a coincidence and intentional.
Indeed, and I understand that was a bit of it was a logistical challenge that you actually stopped shooting Borat in order to get to the set for Chicago 7, but you really couldn't talk about Borat at that point because it was still pretty secret. Is that right?
Yes. So I managed to convince my fellow producers that we'd be able to finish Borat and have it out in time for the election. I mean, we were making this movie for the sole reason of having it seen prior to the election, as people were going, to vote, or hopefully encouraging some people to vote. And I managed to convince my fellow producers that we could do it and we could still edit it and shoot it in time. They were worried. And then obviously what I didn't factor in was the pandemic. But then once I arrived on set, I didn't tell anyone, including Aaron Sorkin, what I'd been doing the prior 3 months, because I had to keep Borat under wraps.
I cannot even imagine what a challenge that would have been as just performance-wise. You're coming from this persona that you've built over the years, this very specific style of comedy and performance that you have perfected and refined and turned in, it just developed a really sublime art form. And then you're you're going to more of, I guess, a straight dramatic role, even though the guy you're playing is also a part of that comedic agitprop tradition. It's fascinating. Was it technically difficult to make that shift?
Yes, I mean, it was, because I was going straight from Borat. So while I was shooting Borat during the days, at night I was learning the dialect of Abby with this incredible dialect coach called Tim Monick, who I'd met on the set of Scorsese's Hugo. And so I was, trying to, it's an Aaron Sorkin movie, so you have to be perfect down to every comma and full stop. And so I was, trying to make sure that script was completely innate, trying to study Abby and learn him and research him at night, and during the day shooting Borat and obviously rewriting that script at the same time. So that period there was really hard. Then when I actually got to Chicago, I could fully focus on Abby Hoffman, and it was challenging because Abby has his own set of challenges.
Indeed, and I have checked with friends in Massachusetts, and they say, yeah, it's okay. The Worcester accent, like, it's good. And that's high praise coming from people in Massachusetts because they're so.
Thank you very much. Because they don't overdo it like people in LA and say it's awesome when it's just good. So that's good. I'll take that. Yeah, I mean, he's got a very specific accent. It's Massachusetts mixed with a little bit of Brandeis, mixed with a bit of Berkeley, where he spent many years. And then he's just got a very, very unique voice. So I managed to track down all the audio recordings that had been made of him by going to some archives, which are now no longer open. But he had these, when he was performing live, he'd sometimes jump an octave. It'd be a kind of turn into a Yiddish mama. And he also had these sort of weird rhythms. He was very influenced by Lenny Bruce, the stand-up. And when he was doing his live performances, he'd slightly ape some of those rhythms. So, I wasn't trying to do an impersonation of him, but I felt to give him credit and his legacy and those who survived him credit, I had to at least know him completely before trying to inhabit my version of him on set.
Challenge to kind of internalize as much as you can about a person and then kind of throw it away so that you can really deliver a performance rather than a mere mimicry. Tell me a little bit about, like you said, you did study him. I mean, you wrote your dissertation on him, and my understanding too is that Aaron Sorkin maybe didn't quite know as much about him as you did. So could you tell us a little bit about how you helped Aaron understand who Abby Hoffman really was, and then how that informed your performance?
Well, the first time I met Aaron, he was the writer for Chicago 7, being directed by Steven Spielberg. And I had a discussion with Spielberg at the time, which was, why do we have to make this movie? I feel like there has to be a purpose to actually make a movie. And at that time, this was, I think, 2007, it didn't actually feel like there was an imperative to make the movie. My suggestion was that we do it to inspire young people to go out and become like Abby Hoffman and to go on the streets and to make democracy an actual act. Not all of them would risk their lives like Abby was doing, but at that time, in that period in American history, it felt that there was not much active political protest. You weren't seeing the huge demonstrations that we saw last year. And so I felt Abby was an inspirational figure and a hero. Again, I'd known and admired him since the age of 20. And Aaron at that point saw him more as a buffoon and a clown. And actually the thing that convinced Aaron was not me. it was a press conference that you saw a little clip of beforehand, where Abbey's joking around in front of all these journalists. They'd asked him what his price was to call off the protest. And he says very seriously, "My life." And it's chilling when you see it. We actually, I did a Zoom with Lee Weiner, one of the surviving members of the Chicago 7 the other day. And he said he saw that scene in the movie and it reminded him of the chill down his spine when he saw Abbey in the room. You know, Abbey was this prankster. He was a buffoon. He was hilarious. He did all these crazy stunts. He joined the Yippies, tried to get a pig elected, tried to levitate the Pentagon. But underneath it all, he was deeply serious and he was actually ready to die for the fight against injustice. And that's what I'd come across in my thesis in my 20s, which was he was one of a group of sort of left-wing Jewish protesters who joined the civil rights movement in completely disproportionate numbers next to their, considering their race, because you know, Jews were about 30 times more likely than general white people to join the Black civil rights movement. And what I was interested by and compelled by was the fact that many of these activists knew that they could get violently beaten or they could even get murdered. There's the case of Schwerner Cheney Goodman, which is 2 Jewish students who were murdered and one African-American student who were murdered by the KKK. That was a long answer, wasn't it? You can tell me to shut up.
Oh, no. Well, you know, but we have a wonderful clip that illustrates your point beautifully in terms of that balance that Abbie Hoffman, and I would argue Sacha Baron Cohen, have between that comedic agitprop sensibility and really being thoughtfully grounded. This is a scene, one of the best scenes in the movie, I think. The courtroom scene when Abbie Hoffman's on the stand. He's being cross-examined by federal prosecutor Richard Schultz, played in the film by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Let's watch.
Do you have contempt for your government?
I'll tell you, Mr. Schultz, it's nothing compared to the contempt my government has for me.
We've heard testimony from 27 witnesses under oath that say you hoped for a confrontation with the police, that your plans for the convention were designed specifically to draw the police into a confrontation.
Well, if I'd known it was going to be the first wish of mine that came true, I would have aimed a lot higher.
It's a yes or no question. When you came to Chicago, were you hoping for a confrontation with the police? I'm concerned you have to think about it.
Give me a moment, would you, friend? I've never been on trial for my thoughts before.
What a great line. I've never been on trial for my thoughts, right?
Well, the reason you have that incredible cast, and those are some of the greatest actors in the world, they really are. Many of them have won Oscars. They are legends, you know, of stage and screen, is because of that writing, right? It's not just a story. It's that you have Aaron Sorkin, who's our Shakespeare of cinema, has refined and reinvented this script that he's been living with for 13 years. Everybody reads it, and he can get anyone in the world to play those roles. And I was lucky enough that he chose me again. But yeah, he is the greatest living screenwriter.
There's another parallel there, I think, between Abbie and you, which is that you have made an art form of getting us, and by that I mean Americans and the people that are in your Borat films, to reveal their deepest thought. You know, through that very unique way of performing that you have developed, which I would argue has its roots in Jonathan Swift, and you've already talked about your clown teacher and the Buffon tradition, but do you see a parallel there with Abbie and Borat and you? And all your multitudes?
You know, but Borat is obviously the opposite of Abby. Borat is a misogynist. Abby is a feminist. Borat is a anti-Semite. Abby is an anti-racist. Borat is an authoritarian. Abby fights for democracy. But yes, I wonder whether, and I'm very bad at knowing myself of my mental process, but I wonder whether subconsciously, perhaps when I was studying Abbie Hoffman in Cambridge, whether I was inspired by him and inspired by the idea of using humor to challenge the establishment and challenge those with power. That's in the tradition of the bouffon, which is, as you refer to, it's this kind of medieval style of comedy and satire where people who were kind of dispossessed would put on plays where they would pretend to be the king of France, and it was an early form of satire, quite a vicious form. And what I noticed the first time I ever did Borat, I realized it would allow people to open up far more than we'd ever seen them on TV, primarily because they thought they were doing this for a show in another country. And actually the first TV show that I pitched a TV channel, which failed, and they rejected it, was me as Borat. And I pitched it not as a comedy show, I pitched it to the documentary department of the BBC. I said, this is a mechanism to get English people to really reveal what they think about things, not what they're ready to say in front of the camera, what they would say behind closed doors. And so, yeah, it is, I'm hoping to reveal the thoughts of Americans and the complexity of them, really. I mean, I know I finished in the middle of a sentence, but then I raised my eyebrows. I'm not very good at doing interviews as myself. This is my least popular character, Sacha Baron Cohen. So you may see the numbers decline during this live show.
I disagree. I think you're doing absolutely splendidly. It's wonderful. You've just set up another. There's a great clip from Borat that I think, again, illustrates exactly what you're saying, which is that not only are you allowing us to sometimes reveal our deepest flaws, but our humanity as well. This is a scene from Borat's subsequent movie film. Let's watch this and then come back and talk about it.
Where is everybody? I do not see anybody on the street.
Everybody's at home. They're telling them to stay inside so they don't spread this virus.
There's a virus?
Yes. They're wanting everybody to quarantine.
I do not have nowhere else to go. Could I stay in your home?
This is it. Come on in. Go ahead and come on in.
Very nice.
Hello.
Yes.
Nice to meet you. Okay.
Yes. How long must we be stuck in here?
Well, don't know for sure till this COVID-19 thing passes.
What is more dangerous, this virus or the Democrat?
Democrats.
Democrats. I think with the Democrats, with Obama, and I think it goes back to the Clintons when they were also in office.
This Clinton, they make this plague?
Yes.
Yes.
Nice.
So this is a really interesting scene here with you and these two gentlemen, because as you were saying earlier, when you were first developing Borat and Ali G, the aim was to punch up all the time, right? And sort of speak truth to power. But the power dynamic here is not as clear.
Yes, because that's not what I'm trying to show here. This is the aim of living with them, was to show the dangers of conspiracies and lies being spread by those with power. And by that, I mean politicians, I mean owners of certain news channels, and the handful of people who run social media. So these are people who are spreading lies and conspiracies for their own power. And I wanted to see the effect of that on ordinary people, and also to show their complexities. So Jim and Jerry are ordinary guys. They're actually good people. They welcome Borat. A lot of liberals would probably see them as the enemy because they hold views that are not dissimilar from the people who attacked the Capitol. But what I wanted to show is that they've been fed a diet of lies and conspiracies, and that there was complexity. They had many positive things about them that, you'd probably dismiss, in a very divided America and an increasingly divided world. I wanted to show that we actually can't dismiss these people. They recognized that many of Borat's views about women were horrific, that in a way Jim and Jerry were feminists. They believed that women should be treated equally. And so I wanted to show their humanity, and that the internet had made them and us susceptible to lies. So this, the first movie was more about revealing a darker side of America. I mean, it was a comedy, but it was to show a kind of underbelly of racism, misogyny, and anti-Semitism. This movie was more about showing how these lies could lead, if Trump had won again, into an authoritarian regime in America and the end of what we perceive as American democracy. And the way to do that is by spreading lies to ordinary people. So I had to talk to ordinary people here, and I had to do the following scene where Borat sings a song that these two guys, Jim and Jerry, had co-written, which is called, it uses Trump's racist term for coronavirus, and it's entitled the Wuhan flu. And it was to show actually the danger of these racist views that were being adopted by common people. And that eventually would lead to violence. So for me, it was imperative to show that how these conspiracies, when lies are spread, people will die, right? That's what we saw recently with these horrific killings of Asians. That's what we saw at the Capitol. That's what we're seeing with the lies spread about coronavirus. These lies spread by fundamentally, people who are looking to promote their own power or their own wealth and adopted by ordinary people lead to death. So not the basis of a normal comedy movie, but yeah, that's what that's about.
You take it where you can find it. Do I'm sure you get this question a lot, Sacha, about and it kind of circles back to that line from Abby in the trailer where he says, you're going to have to hurt some feelings. If we're going to do our job right, we're going to hurt some feelings. And when you are doing this work in these communities, do you worry about crossing a line, an ethical line or a humanistic line, or what are your own kind of private rules of the road and guardrails so that you are staying true to your own principles in terms of dealing with people?
Yes, well, listen, firstly, a reminder, I'm a comedian and an actor, so I'm meant to be deeply immoral. But I would say in the writer's room, we are discussing the ethics of every piece continually. Is there a satirical point? Obviously there are scenes that are there just to be funny, but there are a number of lines that we are trying to stay within. So yes, literally I've been doing that continually, really from day one. So, I have different standards put on me because I'm not a politician. You know, you're not expecting Peter Sellers to be a great human being or any other comedians. But yeah, well, you know, myself and my fellow writers, we're trying to do something that is firstly really funny. In this movie, we tried to do something that was really moving, which was a challenge for us, and I hope we succeeded. But we are trying to do something that is moral. And I was really angry about this immoral government and these things that were so wrong to me. And so, yes, the whole basis of that movie, of Borat, of making it, is to not be a bystander, which to me is an immoral thing to do when democracy is being shattered. I feel like you're complicit if you're a bystander. How do I not be a bystander? You know, some people go out and march in the streets. What I do is I open the cupboard and take out the grey suit and go out and into the world. So that's sorry, you were saying.
No, this is actually the perfect point to introduce another Sacha Baron Cohen to our audience, which is the guy who puts on the suit and goes out and does activist work. This is a clip from your speech upon receiving the International Leadership Award from the Anti-Defamation League. That was in 2019. This has been seen over 2 million times. Let's see a short clip.
Today, around the world, demagogues appeal to our worst instincts. Conspiracy theories, once confined to the fringe, are going mainstream. It's as if the age of reason, the era of evidential argument, is ending, and now knowledge is increasingly delegitimized and scientific consensus is dismissed. Democracy, which depends on shared truths, is in retreat, and autocracy, which depends on shared lies, is on the march. Hate crimes are surging, as are murderous attacks on religious and ethnic minorities. Now, what do all these dangerous trends have in common? I'm just a comedian and an actor, I'm not a scholar, but one thing is pretty clear to me. All this hate and violence is being facilitated by a handful of internet companies that amount to the greatest propaganda machine in history.
Those words are truer than ever. They were true then, and they're even truer now. Of course, we did see some of the leaders of social media and Google today on the Hill, but how do you think these executives should be held accountable? Do you have any specific ideas, either on the basis of regulation or just our own behavior?
Well, there has to be regulation. What's clear and what's evident is there's only one objective from these handful of people that run Silicon Valley, and that's to increase their share price. In other words, greed. And any changes that have happened along in the internet since that speech have been through the campaigning of groups like Stop Hate for Profit. So these companies do not become more ethical. The only way to do that is through public pressure, which I believe Stop Hate for Profit helped create, and then through regulation. So we have to completely overhaul something called Section 230, and it's some of you may have heard of it because Donald Trump popularized that part of the law. And quite simply, I believe if someone like Mark Zuckerberg helps facilitate the death of people, if he spreads lies that kill people, if he spreads anti-Asian sentiment that leads to murders, if he allows death threats online that lead to people being killed, it's odd that he can't end up in jail. I mean, currently he can't even be sued. So I'm liable for anything that I put out. I've been sued many times. I'm currently being sued by Judge Roy Moore for a piece I did with him on a show a few years ago. But because of the law that was set up in a completely different age, these internet companies and this handful of people, it really is about 5 or 6 people, cannot be sued. So they are completely unaccountable. So yes, regulation needs to happen fast because these platforms are biased towards spreading conspiracy theories that kill. I mean, look at the COVID conspiracies. YouTube, which is also completely controlled by one person, has been spreading conspiracy theories about COVID from the beginning, about 5G, which led to attacks on masks that were spreading radio signals. They spread the concept of the plandemic, the idea that the pandemic was in fact planned by George Soros and Bill Gates. I mean, these are very dangerous ideas that ended up convincing people not to follow scientific protocol. And that led to the needless death of, hundreds of thousands, if not more people. I mean, what's clear a year on from the start of the pandemic is that there were 2 ways to handle it. And again, I'm a comedian, I'm an actor, so feel free to switch off. But you could either follow science, which countries like New Zealand did, or Singapore, and you can reduce the death rate, drastically, or you can spread conspiracies like Donald Trump did, and you can have a huge death toll. So the spreading of these conspiracies, whether it's about Asians or whether it's about Jews or whether it's about COVID, these lies, when people lie, people die. And they're unaccountable. So I think the need for legislation is urgent because you have fundamentally a small group of completely amoral billionaires who are working within organizations where nobody is challenging them. And it's going to carry on the lies, the conspiracies, and it ultimately it destroys democracy and it destroys fact and it undermines scientific consensus, and that's very problematic. People aren't going to take the vaccine if anti-vax conspiracy theories are spread on the net, and they are, we've recently found out that the anti-vaxxers have actually intentionally targeted certain ethnic groups. They've targeted Muslims, saying that spreading lies that the vaccine is not halal. These lies, but they're trying to get people not to take the vaccine. That's going to lead to this pandemic being with us longer, more variants and more death. So no, it's not okay. I think we will look back at this period and we will be, we will look at it in disbelief that we let these handful of people act like emperors.
I wanted to ask you about the pandemic and what this last year has taught you about audiences and stories, and has it changed your plans in terms of the kinds of storytelling and stories you're going to be doing in the future? What's next?
I have no plans. I don't really. I'm very bad at making plans, or I've done very few projects really, considering I've been around for quite a while. I've only really done about 5 movies that are not my own, and usually I do them when I just completely admire the director. So if Scorsese asked me to play a role in Hugo, I'd say yes. And again, Abby Hoffman was the thing that drew me, and obviously Aaron Sorkin's writing. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if the pandemic has changed my attitude to that. I mean, again, I brought out Borat because I felt democracy, you know, I feel very privileged to have been brought up in a democratic country, and, you know, with democracy with all its faults, it was something that I felt you have to, you know, to actually be active to defend. I'm not saying I defended it, but it was my attempt, and it was the reason why the crew I had and the writers and Maria Bakalova, the brilliant actress who plays Borat's daughter, took these real risks making that movie, because we were just really scared that American democracy was disintegrating. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, you did, and unfortunately we're out of time. But I do want to that ties into your activism continuing. I know there's a town hall, I think tomorrow at noon. Can you quickly tell us how to tune into that with activists like Dolores Huerta and other important people? How do people tune in?
I do not know the details, but I can tell you it was really interesting. I mean, I was really honored to be there. And there's actually one of the original members of the Chicago 7 is there. So it was a real honor to be in that panel. But, you know, there's a talk about... Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, it felt... You know, I felt slightly out of place, because those are real activists who have really made a change. I mean, Weiner from the Chicago 7 is still an activist. You know, he's still true. You know, much like Abby Hoffman, who till his dying day, unfortunately, as those of you who saw the movie know, he committed suicide. He was a manic depressive, but until his dying day, he was... Almost all the money he was making through giving speeches and writing books, he gave back to the cause. And so I would tune in. I found it really interesting.
I'm sure it'll be fascinating. I think it's the Netflix YouTube channel, if such a thing exists. So Google that, tune in. Sacha, I could go on forever, but unfortunately, that's all we have time for tonight. I cannot thank you enough for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. That's having my least entertaining character on. Thank you.
Not at all. Everyone, please tune in again tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Eastern for a powerful conversation about combating anti-Asian racism with Representatives Judy Chu and Mark Takano. Once again, I'm Ann Hornaday, Chief Film Critic for The Washington Post. Thank you all for watching Washington Post Live.